Well, I believe that there's tremendous power in encouragement. So I wanted to take this time to encourage you because you are a special person. You're important to the kingdom of God, and you're important to us at Joyce Meyer Ministries. What about me? 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 What about...
The cameras go dark on a Tuesday morning, and nobody explains why. For decades, Joyce Meyer's face appeared in homes across America every single day. Steady, confident, promising that your pain could become your platform. Then, without ceremony or announcement, her program vanishes from one of the largest Christian networks in the country. No press release, no farewell episode, just silence where certainty used to live. And here's the part that makes the silence so loud. This isn't just a scheduling change. It's the latest crack in a foundation that millions of people built their faith on. Because the woman who taught an entire generation to overcome trauma, to rise from abuse, to turn suffering into strength, is now facing a crisis that all her resilience training didn't prepare her for. The ministry isn't collapsing in scandal, it's eroding in something quieter and far more unnerving. A slow loss of ground that even she may not fully see yet. This is not a story about a fall from grace. It's a story about what happens when the very thing that made you unstoppable starts working against you. Joyce Meyer didn't build an empire by being soft. She built it by being unbreakable. And that's exactly what's trapping her now. She was born Joyce Hutchinson in 1943 in a neighborhood in St. Louis where survival wasn't inspirational, it was just mandatory. The house she grew up in wasn't a home, it was a site of ongoing damage. Her father sexually abused her for years. Her mother knew and did nothing. Joyce learned early that no one was coming to save her, that authority figures could be predators, and that love was something you performed for but never received freely. So she made a decision that would shape everything. She would never be powerless again. That principle worked. It got her out. It got her married. It got her into a church where she started teaching women's Bible studies in a rented room with folding chairs and a cassette recorder. She wasn't elegant. She wasn't seminary trained. She was raw, direct, and unafraid to say the things pastors whispered about in private: abuse, shame, anger, the gap between what Christians were supposed to feel and what they actually did. Women came because Joyce didn't sound like she was performing holiness. She sounded like she had fought for it and won. By the early 1990s, she had a radio show, then local television, then a daily broadcast called Enjoying Everyday Life that grew so fast it frightened even her early partners. She wasn't asking for permission anymore. She was preaching in stadiums, publishing bestsellers, building a headquarters in Missouri that looked more like a corporate campus than a church office. And she did it all while repeating the same foundational message: your trauma does not define you. You can take control. You can win. But control is a seductive drug, and Joyce Meyer became one of the most controlled, controlling figures in American Christian media. Every aspect of her ministry ran with military efficiency: the conferences, the books, the partnerships, the donor systems, the leadership structure. It was all engineered to scale, and scale it did. At her peak, Joyce Meyer Ministries was broadcasting in 100 countries, pulling in more than $100 million in annual revenue, employing hundreds of staff, and influencing millions of lives. She became one of the most recognized Christian faces on the planet, more famous than most pastors, more trusted than most theologians. Her audience wasn't just religious conservatives, it was abuse survivors, single mothers, working-class women who saw in her the same grit they needed to survive. But here's the detail almost everyone missed. The ministry that taught people to heal from control was still being run by someone who never fully let go of it. Joyce's theology was empowerment, but her leadership style was empire. And empires require loyalty, hierarchy, and an unquestioned center.
She placed family members in top positions, her husband Dave as vice president, children in key roles. She built a system where disagreement looked like disloyalty and accountability looked like doubt. The board was small, insular, and filled with people who owed their careers to her. This wasn't necessarily corruption. It was something more human and more dangerous. It was a woman who had been betrayed by every authority figure in her childhood, now making sure she would never again answer to anyone she didn't fully trust. For years, that worked, because the results were undeniable. Lives were changed, ministries were launched, books sold millions, but systems built on personal trust instead of structural accountability don't fail loudly, they fail slowly, in ways that look like bad luck or shifting circumstances until you step back and see the pattern. The first public fracture came in 2003 when the St. Louis Post-Dispatch published an investigation into the ministry's finances. Reporters found that Joyce and her family were living in luxury that seemed difficult to reconcile with a nonprofit mission. A $10 million private jet, a $2 million home, another $2 million home for vacations, a staff-funded $500,000 Porsche for her birthday. The ministry defended it all as reasonable compensation for a global leader. Supporters agreed. Critics called it prosperity gospel in disguise. And Joyce did what she always did when questioned. She doubled down, explained her worth, and kept preaching. She survived that storm, but it left a mark. Donors started asking harder questions. Watchdog organizations pushed for more transparency. The IRS began reviewing her tax-exempt status. Nothing resulted in criminal charges, nothing shut her down, but the aura of intouchability began to thin. Then the market shifted underneath her. Television, the medium that built Joyce Meyer into a household name, started losing its grip on younger audiences. Streaming replaced cable, podcasts replaced radio. Influence moved from stages to smartphones, from hour-long teaching to 2-minute reels. Joyce tried to adapt, launched a YouTube channel, expanded social media, updated her branding, but adaptation requires flexibility, and the entire structure of her ministry had been built around her voice, her presence, her singular authority. You can't decentralize a brand that is a person. Her reach began to contract. Conferences that once filled arenas now drew smaller crowds. Book sales that once dominated Christian bestseller lists started sliding. Partnerships that had been automatic for decades required renegotiations, and then, quietly, her show started disappearing from networks. No one made an announcement, there was no dramatic confrontation, but longtime viewers began noticing that the familiar time slots were filled with other programs. Some networks cited scheduling changes, others simply moved on. One of the largest Christian broadcasters dropped her entirely, and the ministry's response was a brief, vague statement about exploring new opportunities. But the truth was harder to spin. Joyce Meyer, who had once been considered essential programming, was now treated as optional. And here's where the real crisis lives, not in the loss of a time slot, but in what that loss represents. For decades, Joyce built her authority on being unshakable. Her message was, "I survived the worst, and so can you." Her credibility came from her story of overcoming. But overcoming requires an enemy you can name: abuse, poverty, doubt, fear. What happens when the enemy is erosion? When the crisis isn't a villain, but a slow, systemic loss of relevance? When the thing you need to overcome is time itself, and the fact that the world moved on while you kept doing what always worked. Joyce is now in her 80s. She still preaches, she still writes, she still believes with total conviction that her ministry is anointed and her message is needed. And she's not wrong about the need. There are still millions of women who need to hear that their abuse doesn't define them. But those women are increasingly hearing it from younger voices, trauma-informed therapists, survivors who speak the language of therapy rather than spiritual warfare. The market Joyce once dominated is now crowded, diverse, and suspicious of centralized authority. She taught people to let go of the past, but she never built a succession plan. She taught people to trust God's timing, but she structured her ministry so that her timing was God's timing. She taught people that control is an illusion, but she never stopped controlling. Stop here for a moment and consider what this costs. Not Joyce, she will be fine. She has wealth, legacy, a family that loves her, and a theology that can frame any outcome as divine purpose. But what about the staff who built their careers inside a system now struggling to stay stable? What about the smaller ministries that modeled themselves on her structure and are now facing the same irrelevance? What about the women who were taught that strength means never showing weakness, that leadership means never sharing power, and are now leading ministries that are suffocating under the same mistakes? Joyce Meyer didn't fail because she was cruel. She didn't fall because she was corrupt. She's losing ground because she built something that only works if she never stops, never changes, and never lets go. And no human system survives that. The ministry still exists. The website still streams content. The social media accounts still post daily encouragement, but the energy has shifted. Employees have quietly left. Conferences have been scaled back. The global expansion has slowed. There are rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, of internal disagreements about direction.
The global expansion has slowed. There are rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, of internal disagreements about direction, about whether to modernize or double down, about what happens when Joyce is no longer able to lead. The ministry has not addressed those rumors, and the silence, once again, says more than any statement could. Because the woman who made a career out of confronting hard truths is now surrounded by a system that may not be able to tell her the hardest one, that the ministry she built to help people let go is now the thing she cannot release. This isn't scandal, it's something sadder. It's the slow realization that the very resilience that saved her is now the thing preventing her from adapting. She survived by refusing to be controlled, and now she leads a ministry that cannot survive without her control. The cameras went dark on a Tuesday morning, and maybe in the quietest part of her mind, Joyce Meyer knows exactly why. Not because of conspiracy or betrayal or spiritual attack, but because the world she conquered no longer works the way it did when she learned to conquer it. And the question she taught millions of women to ask, what do I need to let go of to move forward, is now the question her own ministry cannot answer. She once said that the worst prison is the one you build yourself. She was talking about shame, but the principle applies to empires too. If you want to understand how faith-based influence really works in America and what happens when it starts to fracture, there's another story you need to hear. It involves even more money, even more cameras, and a fall that came faster than anyone predicted.